Good evening, everyone. We have an informational starting tonight's activities, and it's about our School Facilities Review Committee. And the floor is yours, sir.
Good evening. Those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Mark Betancourt. Presently, I am the President Pro Tem of the City Council. But in this role, I was the School Facilities Review Committee Chairman. You all right?
No, I'm good.
Okay. And I was appointed to chair the committee back in 2018, and we basically, let's talk about, see if we get this thing to work. Hello? So the committee comprised, I think, of a pretty decent cross-section of people with basically community members, people from the Board of Ed, people from the City Council, as this is going to be Alderman DeLucia and Alderman Gould's refresher, I guess, because they sat there through the whole process and certainly don't need a refresher, but they certainly know what happened here. And several members of the staff from Norwich Public Schools have participated as ex officio members that supplied support for the committee. The committee did not have, I will point out some things at the onset, that the committee did not have a budget. We did not do any architectural work. So when the report we issued was based purely on the information that was gleaned from the report of 2006 that failed here at the City Council, and the information provided from Norwich Public Schools, NPS for short. So let's see if we do it now. Will it work? I'll tell you what, just hit the nice clip.
Do that part. So when he gets to the next, Mark didn't introduce me, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tricia Staley. I'm a member of the Board of Education, and I was vice chair of the Facilities Review Committee.
This is the mic.
All right. You'll note that there's a slide on the second page noted executive summary, and these are some of the conclusions that the committee reached. The major one is that the Norwich Public School buildings are in need of reconfiguration and renovation based on several factors. Several buildings have reached or exceeded their design life span. Several buildings are serving purposes that they were not originally designed for. At least 4 of the buildings have accessibility issues under the American with Disabilities Act. And except for Kelly, Steam Magnet School, every building soon will need major capital improvements, and those costs will be borne solely by the city. There will be no state reimbursement for things like new roofs and new boilers and that kind of thing. You want me to keep going, Mark? Or are you coming back?
I'll come back.
Okay, we were going to do a switch after.
In process, basically the first thing that happened was Abby Dolliver, when she was superintendent of schools, offered the committee members chances to tour a lot of the public schools, and several of all the members, to my knowledge, took part in some of the tours anyway. So after that, we reviewed the 2016 strategic planning study, basically to evaluate the condition of buildings. As that study did make some determinations regarding that condition, capital improvement needs in the future, those kind of issues. And then we wanted to evaluate the size and the nature of each site for conditions that would allow for expansion and renovation. So after that, the committee spent a considerable amount of time working on putting together a survey. Thank you, Alderman DeLucia. And that survey was put out in December of 2018 to the public using both electronic and paper means. We also used places like the Senior Center, Otis Library, and any other means at our disposal. We did reach out to various civic groups, trying to get as much input as we could in the survey. Those survey results are in including the comments, are in Appendix A of the report. In Appendix B is the age and size of each site. You'll see all of the sites are pretty old, and in any normal course of action will require renovation at this point. So at the end of this process, the committee considered the information that we received from Norwich Public Schools regarding current enrollment, and although we did not conduct an enrollment study, because that would have cost money, obviously, we did have some data from a year or two ago, and that allowed us to make at least some reasoned assumptions regarding, regarding enrollment. And we did want to do, and allowed us to probably to try to set some goals regarding that. So we also wanted the goals set up to last at least 25 years, because this is not a process, obviously, that you want to be doing now and then trying to do again in 10, 15 years. It needs to last. So.
All right. The next slide is titled Rationale, and it gives you some of the information that we learned as we were conducting our studies. And I will also mention that we have recently received a study about projected enrollment, and it doesn't look like it's going to go down very, very much over the next 5 to 10 years at least. Residential development increases could bring more increased enrollment. The creation of adequate space would allow outplaced district students to return and may attract tuition-paying students from other communities. And that's programs for special needs students and for others whose needs cannot be met within the district because of their need for some sort of special programming. It is likely that we will need to have some sort of additional programming for students who have been expelled. Several state laws have begun to address that. There is a good possibility that somewhere in the next few years, we will be required to provide full-day pre-kindergarten or preschool. And that could bring an increase in enrollment of up to 100 students or more based on current populations. Renovated schools historically attract new students, and the implications of that are that students might not opt to go out of district to magnet schools or charter schools outside of the local district. If any of the private schools should close, the Catholic schools, for example, we could be looking at an increase of another, say, 200 students. Several of the buildings have met or exceeded their design life, as we said.
So some of the parameters we set, there was some discussion on the old committee regarding the makeup of the schools, regarding whether there'd be K through 2 in some schools, 3 through 6 or 5 in others, and that kind of activity. So when we discussed it, we thought the best case was each elementary school will house pre-K through 5. And the rationale there is we really want to get the schools being thought of as a center for the community, I think, and try so that people, as an area that, people could depend on. When they went to school, they sent their children there, that they're going to be there for a while, and then they could depend on that. So the 2 middle schools will remain in place as 6, 7, and 8. That'd be Kelly and teachers. And then the committee advocates for planning for 3,000 to 3,200 students in pre-K through grade 5. The reason for that is some of this will get touched on later, but we certainly, one, we want to build for the future, but 2, we also want to consider bringing students back into the system that no longer are, that right now are outplaced. Grades 6 and 8 should plan for populations consistent with current projections. So we come to recommendations.
So for the Moriarty Environmental Services Magnet School, That one would be renovated as new and expanded to accommodate 850 students. The Uncas Elementary School would be renovated as new and expanded to accommodate 700 students. John B. Stanton School, the Network Elementary School, also renovated as new and expand to accommodate 850 students. Teachers Memorial Global Studies Magnet Middle School, renovate as new and expand to accommodate educational space needs. And right now, we don't quite know what that's likely to encompass, but the school does need to be increased in size. New construction for an elementary school that would accommodate pre-kindergarten through grade 5, probably for 300 to 600 students, depending on a final decision about the size of the other schools. If the desire were to have smaller schools, then this one would be a little bit bigger. If the desire was to go with the recommendation for 700 to 800 students, then this one would probably be a bit smaller.
So the Kelly Steam Magnet Middle School, which was just renovated in the last few years, remains the middle school for grades 6 to 8. No construction is necessary there. The Samuel Huntington School requires capital improvements. It's just even to be used as the space for central office. So what we're considering is moving, we recommend move the central office staff and personnel to that site. Move the nurse supervisor from Bishop, move registration from Bishop, move technology from Bishop, and move the Norwich Transition Academy from Hickory Street. Now, the main purpose for this is when we go forward and we look for renovation dollars for Samuel Huntington School, having it in use still as a school will facilitate that activity. If it was just an administration building, then the cost to the city would be quite a bit more. So obviously, as I mentioned, Bishop Early Learning Center, the pre-K program then would be distributed to classes among the elementary school, and the registration, technology, and facility, and technology department would go to Huntington. The facilities department would move to a site to be determined. We have some possibilities listed here, and the property would be listed for sale. Oops, I think I went up one.
All right, the Deborah Lieutenant Zinowitz Early Learning Center on Case Street. The pre-K program that's housed there would move into elementary schools. That property is listed for sale. There are two separate buildings on Hickory Street. The Norwich Transition Academy would go to Huntington, and the Adult Education Consortium and the Virtual Learning Academy would go to the Wequonic School in Taffville. Food services, we don't know for sure yet where the best site would be. A lot of it would depend on decisions that were made about the other buildings. And both of those properties on Hickory Street would be listed for sale. The John Mason School, which is currently the home of the central offices, the central office staff, as Mark said, would be moved to the Huntington School site. That property would be listed for sale. The Thomas Mahan Elementary School on Salem Turnpike would be decommissioned as a school, and the property would be listed for sale.
In Taffville, the Wequonic Arts and Technology Magnet School, most of the students would probably move to Moriarty, but that would be depending on what exactly we have available for space and how that's going to work. But capital improvements, new roof, and handicap accessibility will be needed in order to move the Adult Education Consortium from Hickory Street and move the Virtual Learning Academy program from Hickory Street. Veterans Memorial School, that status would be contingent upon the final capacity of the student population of the proposed 4 elementary schools. So if it's kept open, it would be also renovated as new. Maintenance and food service, those, although this is kind of up in the air, but basically we would want to move the staff from Bishop and Hickory Street and relocate them either to Huntington or Wequonic in order to centralize some of the services for the Norwich Public School System. So the next slides are taken out of the original 2016 plan. They've been edited a little bit because they talked a little about like option D and B and whatever that we didn't consider as a group. So this one is the Moriarty Magnet Elementary School. This particular site, as you may be able to see, has got quite a bit of land in it available for expansion. This and the Stanton School, which I think is the next slide, are probably the two no-brainers in the group as far as expansion goes. But so right now, there is a drawing that, in blue there that shows a potential expansion, but again, all of this is going to be dependent on a new architectural review, and we really are not sure exactly how it's going to turn out. That will be the job of the building committee. Again, this is the slide for Stanton Elementary. There are, according to this, there are 4.4 acres. I haven't gone out and measured it myself, but available for expansion. So 192,000 square feet. So the issue with Stanton is that it does require a second large core room. In other words, right now it has a all-in-one space for gym, everything, cafeteria, all that, and would require a new large space, at least one. Here is the Uncas Elementary. I will tell you right now, it's probably, to be perfectly honest with you, if it was just about the size of the lot and some other things, I'd probably go with Mahan to, as far as expansion. It's not the best choice, but in the case of Mahan is on commercial property, really, and there are all sorts of other issues with having a school in that location that really complicate matters. So, but Uncas still we believe, has enough space to allow for significant expansion, and that expansion there is shown there, or the possibility of an expansion. Now, it may be bigger, could be smaller. Again, we're not absolutely positive, but this drawing shows the addition of up to 19 to 22 spaces, learning spaces. And that has a gymnasium and cafeteria, which are already separate. This last one is Teachers Global Studies Magnet Middle School. The addition listed here is, I would call it strictly hypothetical, in that I think the committee's version was basically for storage space and support. I don't think it probably doesn't need a large expansion, but the issue being that besides that, it does need a full renovation, so it would still be a renovate as new project. And I think that concludes my slides. Yes. Any questions?
Yes, Alderman Wilson.
So I want to commend you and the committee for the job that you guys have done to start this process. Of course, I know it wasn't an easy process. My first question is, what other schools, so you talked about ADA problems with some of the schools. What other schools that are possibly being renovated now are on the consideration for renovations besides the one that you shared need ADA fixtures?
I think the one that stands out is Waquanic. And so central office is obviously, that'd be a good one to get. If you've been in there, I know you have.
Absolutely.
So that is not a place you want people, going in to visit and work and do whatever, so. But Waquanic is built basically on 2 elevations, and part of the building isn't really very well accessible, for one. So as a suitability for an elementary school is kind of marginal at this point. So, obviously we make it work. The kindergarten sits there on top next to the playground, and that's the only reason it's allowed to be like that.
Okay. My second question is, you talk about veterans as a possibility for expansion or renovation, more or less. As the committee, would you be renovating the current building, or would you be adding on to the building?
We'd be renovating the current structure as new because the current building is not really suitable for expansion.
Okay.
So, I mean, the possibility exists, you could add a second story to it, maybe, but, you know, that would be something the architects would have to go through. I think part of the thing is, for the committee, is we certainly are aware of some of the geographic issues in the city where the placement of the current schools are. So I think we would prefer that if we look for a new school site, that we look in that, you know, section of town, the east side, Greenville, you know, Laurel Hill section in that area, trying to even out the distribution of schools. But again, this is all going to be a task of the building committee.
Thank you. I think you guys did an excellent job of kind of touching on all facets of the city as far as the distribution of schools, and I think that takes in a lot of consideration. One of the biggest concerns from the previous time, which was transportation.
Well, transportation's still an issue, so let's not, I mean, obviously it's an expensive piece, but there's no easy way to do transportation because the schools, you know, from the input we had from the staff, I mean, we're talking about probably staggering times, starting times at each of the schools, the elementary schools at that level in order to, you know, be able to handle transportation issues. So I'm not sure how, I assume they do something like that now, but.
We're on a three-tiered transportation system.
There you go.
So
Right.
Mahan starts early with the two middle schools, then the other elementary schools start, and NFA is the first one.
Yeah, so there you go. But, so there's obviously, when you're moving 4,000, you know, children around, it's going to take some effort. Anything else?
Alderman DeLucia.
Thank you. This is really more of a statement than a question for you, Mark, but first of all, I'm very proud of the work that the committee did. It's a heavy lift, and it will continue to be so. It was a lot of work, and the committee, I thought, did a great job of finding consensus and respecting each other's viewpoints as we shape this report. And again, not only am I proud, I'm very happy with the work product that we delivered to the city. But my first statement, and Alderman Bettencourt just alluded to it, is the idea that we will be looking for a site for a new school, and where that might be and the feasibility of the different available pieces of property in the city of Norwich remains to be seen. However, we will also, if this plan moves forward, be disposing of some sites, and also, I would say, repurposing some of the sites. And I would like to see us put a focus and make a commitment, even if it's only verbal at this point, that we keep the Greenville neighborhood in mind, because right now we have little or no assets in the Greenville area. We have a lot of kids living in that area, and there's not a lot for them to do in their own neighborhood. So I'd like us not to forget that as we move forward. The second thing, actually, that is really a question, and it's really directed towards the superintendent of schools. If Mr. Mayor, if she could come to the podium, please.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Stringfellow. Thank
Kristen
you
Stringfellow.
for being here tonight. So I know that you've had conversations, I believe, with each and every one of us. I don't know how deeply you've gotten into this topic. I would just like to know, now that you've been here for a while and you've seen the state of not only our facilities, but our educational system. And I know that as a superintendent, you bring a certain vision for what you see Norwich Public Schools will become under your leadership. Does this report dovetail into that vision, and does your vision dovetail into what we have before us?
So I attended some of the meetings of the committee. I agree that I was impressed by the survey, by the commitment of time, by the knowledge base, and that you anchored your work in the research and enrollment projections that came from 2016. In my opinion, which schools close and which schools open should be voiced by community members, as you did in the survey. And the big idea from my perspective is that right now we're investing our dollars that could be used for student programs into failing facilities. And so, yes, most of the visions that you could come up with and what the architect will come up with will fit within our vision and scope, because you're going to be using our reimbursement rate to be able to fix our facilities that are really, in some cases, in dire straits. And so we've talked at board meetings about the Stanton boiler system, about roofs. We've had NPU come give an estimate of costs. I'm developing a full-range capital plan for the Board of Education. And I know that this will have several iterations, but yes, it fits within what our educational programming plan is and how we envision the Norwich Public Schools in the future.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome. Any other members, questions? Mark, got any questions?
Tricia, how's the Board of Ed feel about this? No, I'm just kidding. No, I think I'm good, obviously. I appreciate everyone listening, because obviously 3 of us were on the committee, and all of you pretty much know what was happening there. And like I said, I want to just voice my appreciation for Alderwoman Gould and Alderman DeLucia for their participation. You certainly helped a great deal. I know at one point we were getting a little stagnated, and Stacy kind of at least threw something on the table there and got the conversation moving again. And then, of course, Alderman DeLucia was a force really behind the survey, who did yeoman's work there. And so I did want to thank them both for their efforts, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much for the presentation and all the effort.
You're welcome.